For 10 years, a grandmother in South Los Angeles slept on the dirt behind a chain-link fence. Her name was Irene, but the whole block knew her as Smokey. People waved at her on their way to work. They said hello on their way home. Then they walked through their own front doors, locked them, and left her outside in the dark. One night, a struggling musician who lived 2 doors down looked at that routine and couldn't do it anymore. He didn't have a nonprofit. He didn't have a permit. He had about $500 and a hardware store 10 minutes away. What he built changed her life. What the city did about it afterward is the part almost nobody talks about. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly why a $500 house can survive a winter storm, but can't survive a zoning meeting. This isn't just about one man and one house. It's about a pattern now repeating in cities from Seattle to Detroit to Kansas City. Regular people quietly solving a piece of the homelessness crisis for less money than most Americans spend on a used car. You're going to see exactly how these $500 homes get built, where they legally get placed, and why, even when they work, so many American cities still refuse to let them stay. By the end, you'll understand the real reason this country can build a $500 shed, but can't seem to build $500 housing. As of January 2025, the federal count put the number of Americans without stable housing at roughly 745,000. Nearly 150,000 of them were children. California alone accounts for more than a fifth of that total. Cities have spent years debating billion-dollar housing plans with construction timelines measured in decades. A single unit of government-built supportive housing in a place like Los Angeles can cost upwards of $500,000 and take years before anyone moves in. So here's the question worth sitting with. If a stranger with a hardware store membership can build a livable, lockable home for $500 in a weekend, why does it take a city government 500 times that amount and several years to do less? Back to that night in South LA. The builder's name was Elvis, a guy with tattoos and a mohawk who'd been homeless himself in his 20s. He knew exactly what an unlocked night outside felt like. He spent under $500 on plywood, hinges, and a second-hand window, and in a matter of hours built an 8-foot wooden structure with a door that locked. Irene hung a hand-painted sign on the front, "Home Sweet Home." He filmed the whole process and posted it online almost as an afterthought. The video passed 5 million views. His inbox filled with messages from carpenters, retirees, and kids barely old enough to hold a hammer, all asking the same question: how can I help? A fundraiser he launched brought in over $60,000 in days. Over the following months, he built and gave away 3 dozen more homes, refining the design each time. Solar panels, smoke detectors, steel-reinforced doors. The average cost per home settled around $1,200. Then the city showed up. Sanitation crews confiscated several of the homes directly off the sidewalk, calling them a safety hazard. This was the same city sitting on a stalled $2 billion homelessness plan, with thousands of people still sleeping in tents along its boulevards every night. The backlash was loud enough that officials eventually returned what they'd seized. Elvis kept building anyway. Within a decade, his organization had constructed hundreds of homes, ranging from starter shelters to fully wired units with working kitchens. 800 miles north, Seattle took the same basic idea and turned it into a system. Since 2015, the Low-Income Housing Institute has been building small, insulated houses as a direct alternative to tent encampments, using roughly $2,500 to $4,500 in materials per unit. What makes Seattle's version different is who shows up to build them. Tech companies have sent 400 volunteers to a single event and finished 30 houses in one day. A Girl Scout troop built and furnished one themselves, tucking a box of cookies into a drawer for whoever moved in. Ask anyone who's actually moved into one of these houses what changed first, and most don't mention the square footage. They mention sleeping through the night for the first time in months because nobody could open their door without permission. The city now runs more than a dozen of these villages, and the results back up the feeling. Independent tracking shows that over 90% of residents who moved from a tiny house village into permanent housing were still housed a year later. Compare that to a $500 million program Los Angeles ran around the same time, where roughly 4 out of 10 people placed into housing ended up back on the street. There's a third version of this story playing out in cities most people have written off entirely: Detroit, Baltimore, Cleveland, St. Louis. Decades of population loss left these cities holding thousands of vacant residential lots they can't sell and can't maintain. So a growing number of land banks started practically giving them away. The Detroit Land Bank Authority alone holds more than 20,000 vacant parcels, and side lots can be purchased for as little as $100. Through an online application, most people finish on their lunch break. Talk to people who've actually bought one of these lots, and you'll hear some version of the same sentence. It was never really about owning land. It was about never having to ask a landlord's permission again. Pair that $100 lot with a second-hand backyard shed bought off a local marketplace, listing for a few hundred more. Add basic insulation, a small wood stove, and a rain collection barrel, and you're looking at a fully enclosed, weatherproof home for somewhere between $700 and $1,000 total. Owned outright. No mortgage. No landlord. It sounds almost too simple to be legal in the counties willing to allow it. It is. So what actually happened to Irene? After the city returned the confiscated homes, hers stayed parked on that same block for years. Neighbors who'd walked past her for a decade started stopping to talk instead. She had a door she could lock for the first time in 10 years, and that one detail changed how people treated her. Not as a problem on the sidewalk, but as a neighbor with an address. That's the part of the confiscation story misses. The fight was never really about safety codes. It was about whether a $500 structure built by a guy with a mohawk counted as a real home in the eyes of a city that had spent years failing to build anything at all. Irene's house, in the end, outlasted the controversy. The program that built it has since produced hundreds more. Proof that the most durable part of this entire movement was never the plywood. It was the decision to stop walking past someone. Here's a number worth sitting with if you're paying rent anywhere in this country right now. The median apartment in America runs close to $2,000 a month. That means one single month of your rent costs more than the entire $500 home Elvis built for Irene, with money left over. If you live in a city with a vacant lot a few blocks from your house, there's a real chance that lot is sitting in a land bank inventory right now, available for less than what you'll spend on groceries this month. The empty storage unit down the street from you probably costs more per square foot to rent than what these tiny homes cost to build outright. This isn't a story happening somewhere far away. It's happening in the gap between the house you live in and the empty lot 2 streets over. So if this works this well, why doesn't every city allow it? Here's the detail almost nobody puts in these videos. Most American cities have something called a minimum dwelling size requirement. usually written into zoning code sometime in the 1970s. Typically, it sets 400 square feet as the smallest a home is legally allowed to be. If you opened your own city's zoning code right now and searched for that exact phrase, minimum dwelling size, there's a good chance you'd find it buried in a section nobody's touched in 50 years. It's still sitting there, quietly deciding who gets to build what. That number was never about plumbing, fire safety, or structural soundness. Housing researchers have traced it back to a much simpler motive: keeping small, cheap homes out of neighborhoods where property values depended on keeping the housing stock expensive. A $500 tiny home doesn't fail a safety inspection. It fails a square footage rule that was written specifically to exclude people who couldn't afford anything bigger. That's the real reason a guy with a truck full of plywood can build a livable home in a weekend, while the same house can take 18 months just to get a permit. The shortage was never really about how to build cheap housing. Americans already know how to do that. It was about whether cities would let them. So here's where that leaves us. Across Los Angeles, Seattle, and Detroit, ordinary people have proven repeatedly that you can build a safe, lockable home for under $1,000, sometimes for the cost of a single month's rent. The materials were never the obstacle. The shortage of will, paperwork, and outdated zoning code was. Every version of this story, Elvis and Irene, the Girl Scout troop in Seattle, the family buying a $100 lot in Detroit, comes down to the same idea. A $500 house isn't a technical problem, it's a permission problem. And permission is the one thing that's never actually cost anything to give. If a story like this stays with you the way it stayed with me while putting it together, that feeling usually means something. Almost nobody in this video talks about square footage when you ask what actually changed for them. They talk about sleeping through the night, about not flinching every time someone walks past, about having a door and, for the first time in years, the right to decide who gets to open it. If you want to see which programs are actually doing this kind of work near you, that's the kind of story I keep digging into here. Subscribing just means you won't miss the next one. 745,000 people are outside tonight. Not in a government report, not in a budget meeting. Outside, on concrete, in the cold, with nothing between them and the sky except whatever they manage to carry. Somewhere in that number is someone whose neighbors already know their name. They wave every morning. They say hello every evening. And every night, they go inside and close the door. Irene was that person for 10 years. 10 years of people knowing her name and walking past. 10 years of waving and being waved at, and still sleeping in the dirt when the sun went down. And then one man spent $500 and changed that. Not a program, not a policy, not a committee vote, just a person who looked at another person and decided that tonight was the last night he was going to walk past her. There are still 745,000 people waiting for someone to make that same decision. The materials are at the hardware store. The vacant lots are sitting empty. The only thing this country has never figured out how to manufacture is the moment when one person looks at another and decides, not tonight, not her, not anymore. That moment has always been free.